Okay, we're gonna be doing all these sliders today. Pretty easy job, you know, there's nothing you gotta climb over. I don't have to pull hardly anything out besides the couch, pretty easy. Just the first thing is we're gonna set up the tarp because we don't wanna be, you know, we don't want any overspray on the floors. We wanna make sure that everything stays, you know, dry and just like we arrived. Then we're gonna grab our stuff. Let's see, I've already been doing a couple things this morning, so my stuff is honestly kind of a little bit wet, but get the tools. Okay, let's see. We're gonna be, so we want to add just a little bit of soap, not too much. Now, the film we're using is kind of sticky. Different brands, some are a little bit more sticky than others. So it's definitely helpful to use a little bit more soap sometimes, you know, especially if it's really hot and you're doing stuff right in the heat. Then you want the film to be, you know, to be able to move you want to be able to move the film around a little bit easier, so more soap helps. But it's pretty cold. So right now, you know, it's like 50-something degrees, so we're not going to use that much soap. We get this. We set up our trash can. You know, always good to have, you know, something that looks a little bit more professional than just like a trash bag. I'm out of trash bags. I need to go to the store and get some. I just used the last one on the job. I should have gone to the store to get them, but it's okay. So no trash bag right now, but that's all right. We'll get when we get back to the shop. Go have our stuff, paper towels. We're gonna get the film. Now, the way we're gonna be pulling the film, you wanna make sure that the liner is facing towards you. Because when you roll it, that's how we're gonna be doing these sliders. You know, you're not pulling the liner off by yourself, and most likely, you're not gonna have someone to help you. But, you know, even if you do have someone helping you with these giant pieces, you need to know how to be able to roll it down so that as you're rolling it with your fingers, the adhesive gets exposed and it gets on the glass and you're not touching anything. That way it ensures that, you know, the windows stay really clean. So we're just gonna, I just use my teeth, it's easier. You know, you don't have to do that. You could set the film up on the glass, but it's just kind of a little bit harder. Okay, let's see. So, you know, if this job isn't that big, it's only a few sliders. You know, if it was more, let's say I was doing like maybe 10 or so, I would cut all the pieces individually first and then lay them next to the windows, and I would put them diagonal because it kind of just makes your work environment look a little bit better, like more professional. But for this, since we're only doing a few, you know, I'm just gonna cut like one piece at a time. It's just pretty easy. So first thing I'm gonna do is measure it, and I'm doing this before I'm cleaning anything because, you know, once I get rolling, I just want everything to be set up so I can just go grab it. So this one is gonna be 45 by 75. Okay. So I'm using a 60-inch box. They come in all different, excuse me, they come in different sizes, but since we're doing 45-inch sliders, we're gonna use a 60-inch roll. You could use a 48-inch roll, that would be a little bit better, but I've already had this left over. So just making do with this roll. So I'm gonna cut it to 45 and a half. Just a little bit extra. And what did I say? I think 75 I said. Yeah, 75. So I actually pull it to 75 on the tape measure. The reason I pull exactly to 75 on this is because when you're pulling it out of a box, you're gonna be naturally pulling a couple more inches. So, you know, if you're doing a job where you need, you know, exact amount of footage and you're not cutting off of a film cutter, then you want to keep that kind of stuff in mind because there's, you know, those couple inches add up over, you know, if you're doing 12 windows, a couple inches, that's 2 feet. So if you only brought an extra three feet, you're really close. And if you make one mistake, you know, most likely the window's gonna be over a foot, but then you gotta get more film. So little stuff like that you wanna keep in mind. I'm gonna get this ready to go. Like I said, if I was cutting the pieces all at once, I would just cut them, roll them up, tape them, and set them in the windows, but we'll leave it like this. So now we're gonna start cleaning it. First thing I do is clean everything, you know, spray it real nice and good. You know, the window is, the process, once you get it, is pretty easy. I need a squeegee. But we want to make sure that it's clean. Because as long as the glass is clean, you know, your work is gonna most likely look really good as long as you're cut nice and straight. But that's definitely the most important. Now, something that I've learned that I also got from someone else, you know, most of the dirt is kind of held in the rubber, the molding around the windows. So it's really important to get that clean, especially when you're spraying. You know, if you're spraying the top of this and you didn't wipe it that good, all the dirt is gonna start sinking down. And when you go to push the film up, depending on if you're using something reflective or even a non-reflective film, from the outside, you're gonna be able to see literally everything. So, you know, if you're doing a front door for a business, that's not gonna work. It's gotta be super clean. So I'll start with that, and you'll get your process down. You know, everybody's different where they start, but I mean, that's just that. And I haven't even scraped it, which is gonna be the next thing we're gonna do. It had a guard, but it fell off. So I had a new blade. I changed the blade like once, maybe like once a day or something. It depends on how many jobs I'm doing. If I'm doing more than like 3 jobs in a day, definitely change your blade. Now this stuff is softer than the glass, so it's made for it, so it's not gonna scratch it. But you know, if you have like little nicks and stuff in it, and you're working on really like maybe older glass, you're definitely gonna scratch it. You know, this customer, it's kind of hard to see now, but when I squeegee it, you'll probably be able to see. But on the other side, their dog is kind of getting up on the outside, so it's scratching the outside. But it's not on the inside, so that's okay. But I'm kind of overlapping my passes. You know, it's kind of like cutting grass, I guess. So you want to make sure you get everything. And I only do 1 pass. You know, some people do a couple. It really depends on what you're doing. You know, if you're doing removal and you got the adhesive on the other side, you definitely want to make a couple of passes, because you know, most likely you're gonna miss something. You know, and if the glue shows up, it just shows white on the other side. You're gonna make sure that it's nice and clean. So like if I was doing removal and it had a bunch of stuff, I would actually spray it and I would take my hand over it and just kind of feel everything to make sure I got all the glue and stuff. But fortunately, no removal today, which no removal is kind of a good day, because it definitely takes some good elbow grease to get that stuff off. Okay. All right. Cool, so I'll squeegee it, and then I dry everything one last time, because, you know, all that dirty water is definitely gonna be in the bottoms. See? I'll wipe the top again. Down. Cool. We're ready to do it. Now for this, it's good, you want to start with an edge. You know, if you were already using it, you pull a little piece off, you know, keep in mind. Because if you cut a piece, you forget about that extra, then you just blew a whole 6-foot piece or 5-foot piece. So walk it back. Also, I want to point something out. So this is another reason why it's good to cut off of a machine. You know, I kind of am about doing things with speed. So I don't set the machine up because it takes a little bit extra time. If you have another guy that is working with you, I would recommend getting a film cutter. You know, it's about $1,000, but it pays for itself in just 1 or 2 jobs. Because if you roll it out on the floor, I've already checked to make sure the floors are nice and clean, or clean enough that it's not gonna stick a bunch of stuff up, despite the fact they have animals. They're actually pretty clean. But like dog hair, the film has static in it naturally. So if you're doing it on the ground, it's gonna pick a lot of that stuff up. So if you don't have a really good technique with rolling it, you're gonna get all that hair on the glass. And once you get like a couple of pieces, it's pretty much impossible to get it off. But I'm gonna do that. Another trick you can do, when you roll it out, as long as you don't are like rolling it up where it's got a bunch of friction on the ground, if you just pick it up, that'll make sure it's pretty clean. Now, this is why I say you want to make sure that the liner is facing that way, because when you roll it, you're going to be rolling this down. And as you're rolling the film down, the liner is going to come off. Now, if you're doing smaller windows, of course, you can hold it and just kind of peel it with your mouth, and you can take the liner off. That's really easy. That's usually what I do for smaller windows. Like anything less than, or anything more than 36 inches, I'll hand roll like this. Sometimes 4 feet, I'll do it and I'll just step the liner off with my foot. I can explain that a little bit more in another video, but for this, it's a long window. You're gonna have to roll it like this. Now, believe it or not, there's a little bit of a technique with spraying it. It's kind of just like cleaning when you're getting it wet. You know, you want to make sure that every little spot has water on it, so that way the film isn't going to stick, because especially if you're doing a big piece of glass and it sticks, you know, it's going to be impossible to move it around. And if you squeegee down the spots where it looks like it's flat, but it's not in another space, and you have to move it, there's too much tension on the film and it's not gonna lay right. So that's why you wanna make sure that everything is nice and wet. I try to keep, you know, like from like completely spraying it right in there on the edges, because any little dirt that you missed, it can come back into the film. So I kind of just try to like mist around the edges. The bottom, it doesn't really matter because, you know, obviously gravity is pulling the water down. And I'll spray the other side of the film. I kind of roll it out a little bit with my teeth, just so that way, you know, I can get the full piece on there. But the adhesive is already exposed. The first piece, that backing is already starting to roll right off the film. Now we have one straight edge that comes out of the box, which would be on the right side, but I'm actually not gonna use that because the molding is not really even. You know, if you have a brand new piece of glass, it's really, really straight, then it's okay, it's not a big deal. You can use the straight edge, but for this, the molding is so crooked that we have to hand cut every little piece. I'll kind of move it a little bit, make sure that edge is covered. Just a little bit. Okay, now I've kind of gotten to a point where, you know, I don't like to leave that much extra on either side. But, you know, for starting out, I would definitely recommend leaving more than just like, you know, a ½ inch or so on either side. You know, try to give yourself 2 inches, plenty of space to work with, because, you know, cutting a new piece is expensive, but if you got a little bit extra and you can nail it down, then you're not, you know, you're not making any mistakes. So it's been in my pouch, even though I've been using it, you know, it's good to give it a wipe just to make sure it doesn't pick anything up that's gonna scratch it. And now we're just tacking it. So I just go straight down with it. I just try to do like a little cross just to make sure that, you know, it's tacked in the center, but it's also going to be tacked on the sides, which keeps it from moving up and down and side to side. And I do the same thing like I'm cleaning. You know, I overlap about half. I definitely recommend getting like a bigger one. You know, you can start out with the smaller squeegee where it's only like, you know, 6 inches or so. I don't know how big this is, maybe like 8 inches. This is, yeah, a little bit of a bigger tool definitely helps, because once you start getting it down where you just know the pattern, you know, you're going a lot faster when it's wider and you can just cover more space. And, you know, and that pays off when you're doing buildings that have like, you know, maybe 30, 40 windows per floor. You know, it's possible to knock out the whole job in a day or 2 days. Just definitely depends on a lot of factors. This you might be able to see the scratching on the outside. Fortunately, that's not on the inside. That's pretty deep, so you know you would feel that a little bit, and you have to be careful that you're not, you know, messing up your tools. Now, I cut the bottom first because I'm already at the bottom. You know, I'm kind of, as I'm moving around the glass, whatever area I'm in, I'll start in. I usually squeegee all the water to the bottom. Like I said, because of gravity, you're not going to do it from the bottom up. The bottom is the only spot that I use a card for. If you want to use a card for the sides and everything else, you definitely can. I hand cut because it's better to be used to something like that, because if you're trying to cut a really big window or you're reaching up high, you're not always going to be able to put your 2 hands up there. So it's easier if you can just do it with one hand, come around, and I definitely recommend being able to cut with both hands. That's definitely helpful. You know, if I couldn't cut with one hand, it would be almost impossible. And then another reason I use the card to cut at the bottom is because my blade is not that thick. You know, so if I use a card with a little bit extra thickness, it makes sure that there's not going to be any water buildup at the bottom. There are some cases where I hand cut the bottom, but it really just depends on the frame. You know, anytime I'm doing sliders, you're using a lot of water. So you definitely want to make sure. This is how I cut. I just kind of get right in there, and I don't use that much blade. You know, there's not very much blade sticking out. And I'll go either all the way to the end sometimes, or depending on the angle of your blade, you know, you could just pick back up on the other side and finish cutting. I pull off one piece at a time. And you always want to make sure you have a really sharp blade, because I'm not putting very much pressure on cutting this. You know, you don't need very much pressure. You're using a razor blade. If you need a lot of pressure to cut it, you're probably on the verge of tearing the film. You know, if you catch a piece and tear it, to be honest, the film is pretty forgiving. So there are some cases where, you know, you kind of can fix it, but you're not going to be able to do that every time. Let's see. I think the blade is kind of starting to get a little dull. Let's see if it'll do what I'm talking about. I'm still not putting very much pressure on it, so it probably won't rip, but I do feel like it's kind of getting a little close. I just use a little card, pull that up from the bottom. Okay. Cool, now we're gonna squeegee it. Now, like I mentioned, it's a cold day, so the glass is cold, so I don't have to use this method, but I will. This is kind of an extra tip. If it's really hot and you don't have any spots that it's sticking, the film is, you know, it's fully wet underneath, you can use the squeegee just to kind of tack everything down a little bit. Just to make sure that it's easier when you're squeegeeing all the water out, because otherwise, if the window is really hot, the water is going to start evaporating. So for obvious reasons, we don't want that. We're literally working with water. So I'll spray the whole thing, I'll get it wet. Now I'll start using the actual power squeegee. Now, it will look like, you know, it's pretty much all the way squeegeed out if you use this one, like a lighter tool. But when you come back, I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but you can see, you know, you have to make sure that you do it with a little bit of like a power tool. I'll just kind of come in there like this. Same thing, I overlap a little bit. And I go down. I kind of go, you know, I go side to side. I go up and down. It kind of just, it's all about movement, you know. You're not going to know what your squeegee strokes are from the outside, but if you miss a spot, you will see a bubble, and that's not ever going to go away. You know, the only bubbles that are going to dry are the ones that have water in them. So you know, otherwise you're going to get a big air bubble. You don't want to be coming back to jobs for obvious reasons. I'll do this. Okay. Now this one is pretty much finished. There's a couple of final touches we'll do though. You know, we give it a little bit of a spray. Notice I'm not using very much water. You know, if you're using a bunch of water, you're gonna literally soak everything. You know, I've already been using this for a couple jobs today, so it's already wet, but you know, that's kind of ideal because you got to think if you're doing multiple jobs, you don't want your stuff to get absolutely soaked. Obviously, it's always good to have, you know, some backups, but you know, we just don't want to use very much water. It's just not good to have the customer's floor soaking wet if it doesn't have to be. So I try to use minimal water. Plus, you know, I only use spray bottles. Again, I'm about speed and I don't like tripping over myself. So I don't want a cord. I want the minimal amount of tools on the ground as possible. So I just use a bottle. Plus I can do, you know, I don't know what the calculations per square footage is on the bottles that I have, but these are 30-ounce bottles. I have 5 of them, and I could do probably 800 or 900 square feet on that amount of bottles. Maybe a little bit less. Cool, so we clean the glass now, but we still have to make sure that we tuck all the edges because there is water in all these edges. You can't see it, but if you walk away for a couple minutes, pretty soon that water that's at the top, you're gonna see a water bubble in the center. Depending on the size, it can dry, but if it's too much, eventually it will dry as an air bubble. So there's definitely a fine line there. But, you know, and I'm using a felt card. I recommend using this because sometimes you're gonna wanna use, you know, the other end on the film, but you can't use this because it will scratch the film. So this one is very, very used, but I have some new ones in there. I don't use it in the center of the glass too much. You know, you can wrap a paper towel in it. Like if you're trying to get like a little itty bitty microscopic speck of dirt, you know, you can rub it on there and it'll make it go away. But if you're tucking the edges, use the side that's more like a credit card. And you want one with a little bit of thickness. You don't want it to be as thin as a credit card. Although, you know, there are some times on like final checks for jobs, you know, if I'm running back in with the customer and I've already packed all my stuff up, I know the job is pretty much perfect, I'll use a credit card or something. But as far as using tools when you're doing it, you want to get the right stuff. So that's it. That one's finished.